there's too much to talk about. Okay, so Zeke Rewards was said back in 2016 to be close to the largest Ponzi scheme in history. This particular Ponzi scheme dealt with mostly what they call penny stocks. All right. Unfortunately, I can't take all day and explain what penny stocks are. All right. But it involved, the estimate started at $700 million, and it's been quoted most recently at $900 million, basically effectively taking this amount of money from its victims. So you could see why it's one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in history. So before there was Orso versus Dissner, there was a court case called Bell versus Dissner. I know this is getting a little boring for everybody. Okay. I'm sorry about that. So before that case, there was a court case called Bell versus Dissner, which is related to the Ponzi scheme, where a defended class of approximately 9,400 so-called winners became subject to a government clawback to reduce harm caused to the victims of the Ponzi scheme. All right. And this is how I know it's the same Tony Mathis, because Tony L. Mathis in this clawback is listed by his name, Tony L. Mathis, plus he is also listed next to his name as under Game Time Sports LLC, which was a company that he ran for a little while. And there's lots to tell about Game Time Sports and all the troubles he had with that and the people who sued Tony and Game Time Sports and all this stuff. So when I saw those two names together, I realized I had the right person. Okay. He was named as one of the 9,400 defendants in the Zeke Rewards clawback. Now, remember here at the first bullet point, there were over 700,000 victims, meaning people who were essentially of their money, right? They were promised things that were untrue. They were given untrue statements and things like that. And that's how a Ponzi scheme works. Like, people are promised the world and they are, talked into things by confidence people or people, or they get other people who then recruit other people, right? So there were over 700,000 victims. Okay. Can you imagine how many people were hurt in this? But Tony L. Mathis was not one of the people who was hurt. He did not lose money. So Tony, despite there being 700,000 victims, meaning people who lost money because of this Ponzi scheme, Tony L. Mathis was not. It's an insane number. Yes, it is. So many people were hurt. But Tony was not one of those people who was hurt. Money in this Ponzi scheme, considered, as they called it, a so-called winner in this. But the way Ponzi schemes work is that they have to have some winners, right? Because they have to be able to point to examples like, look at Tony. He's made, $50,000, $60,000 in this or whatever, 20,000, whatever he made. I'll show you the exact amounts he made. So of the 700 plus, let me do this. What is this? Let me do the math. They say it's more than 700,000, but let's. All right. So I just did the math of, I don't know. Can you see this here? Wait. Quick math. I said 9,000 divided by 7, which would give you the percentage. You move the decimal point. If you remember math, you move the decimal point over 2 spots for the percent. Everybody remember, I was a teacher in elementary school and middle school. I could tell you how to find the percentage. You take the smaller number divided by the bigger number, right, to find the percent. Well, in this case, you take the smaller number, not always, but in this case, there's 9,000 people, right, who are the winners, and you divide it among 700,000 people who are totally involved in the case, and then you come up with the number 0.012, and then to find the percentage, you move the decimal point over 2 spots, right, and that gives you the percentage. Julie, I hated percentage and fractions. Well, that's what I'm telling you. Move the decimal point over 2 spots, and you get what the percentage is, which would mean of all the people involved, only 1% were made money. 99% of the people who were defrauded lost money, right? But they always had to have people who were the so-called winners in order. What did you say? Beverly, I mean, like, Al is going to come shut Julie down and tell her no. What is this? Al doesn't follow on. He doesn't follow on YouTube, so it was hard to tell him. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you the story in a second. It's kind of hard to tell him the stories on it because he doesn't have the patience for all of it. And, like, for example, I talked to him about the woman creator who made that terrible video about me, right? Who was, who had just been in court for saying things, or whatever. And she made this video where she said terrible things about me, about Al. He understood the part where I read to him about somebody talking about his, how do I put this right? His genitalia. He understood that part, but to describe who this person is and their background and their history, it would take a long time. And you really don't know unless you watch what, it's hard to understand if you're not following the whole story. But, believe this, he trusts me. Al does trust me. He knows I'm smart. And he knows I have moxie and determination. And I would never do anything to try to put my family, that I thought would put my family in harm's way, that I would try to protect my family. And frankly, I think this person I'm talking about is somebody that it's hard for me to explain to Al how much I feel he is how much I feel like he could, through surrogates, could harm my family. So there's a lot of trust between Al and I, because he knows I always have to. You definitely don't hold people's past against them. Well, that's fine. I mean, but it's not so distant past. I mean, I'm talking this court date that I showed you on the previous slide was 2021. Okay. Was 2021. That's not their past. He's a great man. Thank you. He can. And it's hard for him to kind of understand exactly like all the players and who they are and all that's going on. He knows when I started talking about this case, I told him about Sebastian, and he was as concerned as I was. He knows who Sebastian is and that he's a missing autistic child, and that he knows what I believe about his life and what he went through. And he is as sympathetic as any other autism parent would be. But outside of that, none of, like, when I started talking about this case over a year ago, Al never thought, nor did I think, that a year later I would still be talking about this. And it would so many terrible things would happen. And frankly, you know who I blame? Law enforcement. They don't want me to say anything bad about law enforcement. Tony and Seth don't want me to say anything bad about law enforcement. But if law enforcement had done a better job from the start and not bungled all the investigation from the start and acted on abuse charges and things like that, or taking things seriously, I don't think all of us would be here. And there would be so many people who have been hurt, and lawsuits and this and that, and people going after each other. So, I mean, if there's one place I point my finger, it's law enforcement, because they had a chance to do it right and they screwed it up from the start. And therefore, any chance at having a case and proving it beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury is in jeopardy because of them. So that's who I blame. Anyway, so 1% of the people, 1% of the people in this involved in this Ponzi scheme, whether they knew it was a Ponzi scheme or not. And I have no way of knowing if Tony Mathis knew it was in fact a Ponzi scheme. I don't know. I don't know how the company, because all this stuff was fake, it was all fake. It was literally, what they were doing was taking money from some people and paying some of the money to other people, right? There was no stocks. There was no this. All this whole business idea, it was all built on a house of cards. It was a bunch of crap. And they were taking a little bit and paying it out to 1% of it. So then they could point to these people and who they could, schmooze and everything and say, yes, and that needs to be a national protocol for people investigating missing children. I 100% agree. And we should have that conversation. Oh, thank you, Jason. And so it's all a fraud, right? But I feel like the people who were in the 1%, because it wasn't just that. There was a certain group of people that became the defendants. And it could be more than 1% made money. But the government, or the lawsuit, and the judges and the people who were in charge of sorting this stuff out, usually the courts appoint like I know in the Madoff case, like the courts appoint a person to oversee how to rectify some of the financial losses and things like that. They decided to go after, as defendants, 9,000 of the 700,000 people. And there were more people than that made money, but there was a reason they picked that, and it took them several years. So when I say this started in, what did I say? What was the first date? I don't remember. But when I say this started to 2013 or something like that, what was it? I can't read it. I'll go back to 2021. So it stretched over a long time. The actual Ponzi scheme thing was, I believe, slightly over 2 years or maybe 3 years, something like that. It was 2013. Thank you. It was actually a very short period of time. And 2013 might have been around the time when the SEC got involved. And then later on, there was a court case. And then the person who ran it went to jail, and some of the other people went to jail. And he is still in prison, I believe, I think. And someone wrote, there was a reason. So let me explain. Here, let me go to the next slide. Again, if you just joined, please hit the thumbs up and please consider subscribing. And okay. I apologize if some of this is boring, okay? But I have to explain it, all right? So you understand what's happening. So the Zeke Rewards Ponzi scheme, losers and winners, I titled this. This statement was put out by the attorneys who were the McGuire Woods partner, whose last name partner, Kenneth Bell, who was the first person, right? The Bell versus Disner, right? Bell versus Disner, but the case that's cited on Tony's thing. E-curve, that's funny. That's funny. I love that. Yeah, Callie, yes, please block them. What you just wrote. Disrespect is not going to be tolerated. Thank you. So this was put out. So the first case was Bell versus Disner. The second case, one that's cited on Tony's, is Orso versus Disner, because there's two different cases. Now, I'm just going to read you what this says, okay? And this, again, was put out by the attorneys on the side. February 12, 2015, this was dated. A federal judge in North Carolina has certified a putative defendant class of 9,400, quote, net winners in a massive Ponzi scheme that had more individual victims than any other in U.S. history. Okay, so that's what they're saying. So that was in 2015. I don't know if there's been one bigger than that since then, but at that point in 2015, it was the biggest in terms of the number of victims in U.S. history. The ruling marks a significant victory for a McGuire Woods team working to recover hundreds of millions of dollars lost by victims in the scheme, which was run through Rex Ventures Group, LLC's ZeekRewards.com website. Okay, so Zeke Rewards was owned by this venture group called Rex Venture Group. McGuire was partner Kenneth Bell, right, who became Kenneth Bell versus Dissner, a former. So Dissner was probably the lawyer for. I'm guessing. I don't know. It was a lawyer for the. Actually, I don't want to say if I don't know. A former federal prosecutor is the court. He is the court-appointed receiver for as many as 840,000 potential victims of the scheme. Bell filed a clawback action in February 2014, asserting that the net winners in the remember I said $850 million scheme. I can't read it. It's behind my head. Hold on. I have to go back. Okay. It says are not permitted. Scheme, and behind my head it says, are not permitted to keep the money. They must return the funds for distribution to the victims. Yeah, and that's all it says. They must give it back. So now, my understanding is that, hold on, let me stop sharing for a second as I explain this. My understanding is that the amounts won, let's say, by this group of 9,400 did not include the monies they put up. So let's say you invested $10,000, right? And your returns were $30,000, right? That the money that they would be trying to claw back is not your original $10,000. It would just be the $20,000 of what they call ill-gotten gains. And there's a lot of reasons that they cite in many articles about how they went about deciding who needed to be on the list of people that they had to claw that money back, of winners. Okay, and you could read for yourself because nobody's going to sit here for this long conversation. But there's a reason why these 9,400 people were ultimately named on this list, and I believe it had to do with part of their marketing scheme. Okay, that's my personal opinion. There was a marketing scheme to point to certain winners, and I think certain winners, as the courts agreed, and other people agreed in many articles I've read on it, that many of these so-called winners participated in these marketing schemes, right, to get more victims, which is part of the reason, but not the sole reason, they would have possibly ended up on this list. Now, normally, I know some of that you think it's going to be exciting live, and it's probably a very boring live, but normally, when you have a class of people, when you think of court and you think of a class of people, normally you think of class action, right, which is a class of plaintiffs filing against a few defendants, right? Let's say a big company, whatever, Exxon, right? And you have, what do you say? The Exxon Valdez thing. So you had all these plaintiffs and they become a class. They become a class. All these plaintiffs become a class and they take an action against this company, right? This one entity or these couple entities, right? And so you think of them as plaintiffs, a class of people who take an action, class action against these people. This group would be a defendant or a company or an entity. But in this case, you did have certain people who they took all their assets from. I mean, the guys who went to jail, they took everything from them that they had, and they had squirreled away at least 10 million, if not more, you know. And but this was sort of groundbreaking law because this was the opposite happening. This was the opposite of a class of plaintiffs. This was the government saying, here is a class, right? 9,400 approximately, a class of defendants, saying there's not like all these people suing this one entity. You have, well, the government being the one who's, you know, managing, trying to make right, let's say, the people who were victims in it, and they had to pass law. They had to pass. It was a groundbreaking case where they said the people who were the winners and participants in this, who were 9,400 that they identified as part of this, they were a class of people that they were going to get their ill-gotten gains back from. That they said these money was gotten from illegal actions, and you can keep your initial investment, but you can't keep the profits from an illegal operation. And it set case precedent. It was law, history and law. Okay. So the government went after these 9,400 people, and Tony Mathis was one of them. And let me show you. Again, if my Wi-Fi goes out, I'll be back. Window. All right, I'm just showing you this. I know it's hard to read, but in 2017, okay, so now this is taking us from 2013, 14, right, when the decision comes out, all the way to 2017. It took them that many years. It took them almost 3 years to decide who these 9,400 people should be. I mean, they didn't have that number in mind when they did it, but it took them that long to go through the court cases and identify who needs to return the money that was gotten illegally. And again, it was part of the Bell versus Dissner case. And they put out, that's my husband sneezing, they put out a index of final judgments, right? So these are judgments, court judgments against these individuals. And they've put out a list of these individuals. And I only put this screen up. I know you can't, it's hard to see. They have their name here, right? I just wanted to show you this because this is the list that Tony is on. The name, the city, the state, the Zeke Rewards username, because it could either be the individual's name or their business name. And in Tony's case, it was his business name, Game Time Sports. So which is the reason I know it's not the, however that creator put it, the grimiest black man, very offensive. Okay, it's not the grimiest black man. He didn't run Game Time Sports. Tony Mathis did. Okay, Zeke Reward username. Then they have here, it says in the last 3 columns, net winnings. Then it says pre-judgment interest, and then total amount of final judgment. Because, you know, now it's been several years, and the people who have kept this money have been able to collect interest on those funds. So they calculated the interest. So when I show you, because you're not going to see this heading at the top, when I show you where Tony is, but just remember name, city, state, the username for Zeke rewards, and then the net winnings, the interest amount, and then the total judgment. Okay. And this is in 2017. And they expected that the people on this list would pay back to the government, or at least set up a payment plan to the government immediately. You know, they would either have to pay back the whole amount or set up some type of payment plan to the government to get back the money of ill-gotten gains, things that were part of a criminal enterprise. And now I'm going to show you where Tony's listed. Next slide. Okay, I know it's hard to read. Sorry. But this is the page that Tony is on, and I've highlighted it in red. You see Tony Lee Mathis. At the time, the city he was in was Joplin, Missouri. When this came out in 2017, he was living in Joplin, Missouri, and the username for what he used for Zeke rewards was Game Time Sports, which that is a whole other long story that I have to tell you about Tony, because that really gets the Game Time Sports story is really what gets into the personality of and the willingness to take from small businesses, you know, and without any intention, or at least I don't say any intention, but like take from small businesses and never pay them back. And then when you have all these people suing you for money, you declare bankruptcy. So they can't get their money. Right. So in this case, the net amount that he originally got, which excludes his initial investment. Okay. This is just the profit he made at that time when this operation, which only operated, like I said, 2 to 3 years. It was, you know, a very short time before the SEC stepped in, but nonetheless, they were able to defraud hundreds of thousands of people, 700,000 people or more at the time. You know, and people lost lots and lots of money. You know, they did interviews with people like, oh my God, there was this one woman with a son with leukemia, and she invested their savings of $5,000, which, you know, in this case, isn't that much money, but that's really what they had. And, you know, it was just so sad, you know, and she didn't never get that money back, right? But they tried to make it right for some people. And for some people, they could make claims, and the only amounts they could get back was up to 40% of the money that they lost. And most of them didn't get anything back. But even those who got money back only got back up to 40% of what they lost. So again, if you lost $10,000, if you were one of the lucky ones, you might get back 4,000 of the 10,000 that was lost because it was a scam. It wasn't like you were investing based on, you know, facts and being told the truth. You were investing based on being told lies. That's how a Ponzi scheme works. They think they're invested. There's these penny stocks and things like that. Meanwhile, they're not even doing any trades, you know. And a lot of the people that they targeted were people who were, you know, had limited funds, limited education. You know, it was not good. So his winnings, essentially, his profit was $63,037.44 at the time. Vulnerable people. Thank you, Vivian. Vulnerable people, right? And they said that his interest over the years, is that what they called it, interest? Maybe not interest, but like whatever it was, exactly. Whatever I just said, go back and watch it in the second column, was $21,618.74. Therefore, the total judgment against Tony Mathis is, thank you, Vivian, is $84,656.18. Tony Mathis of Game Time Sports, living in Joplin, Missouri. And the way I can tell that it is Tony Mathis is I have, you know, done searches on him. I have seen that he did at one time live in Joplin, Missouri around these years, you know, let's say for a short period of time. And I know he ran a business called Game Time Sports, which is a whole nother story, which when I read the things that were done with Game Time Sports and everything, it made me very angry personally and feeling like this is not a person I could trust ever. All right. So, but like I said, I'm not done here yet, guys. I'm not done yet because there's more to the story. So you think it ends there with the 84,000. Hold on. But no, it doesn't. It doesn't end there for Tony, because remember, this case was called Bell versus Dissner. But on Tony's case, it was referenced Orso versus Dissner, right? Different case. So I'm like, wait a second. Why is his Orso versus Dissner not just Bell versus Dissner? Because when I found the document of how much he owes, that's part of the Bell versus Dissner case. And the reason is because when the people were informed formally, believe me, the government informed them, the courts, I should say, the court appointed executive in charge of, you know, like they did with Madoff, of recouping what funds they could that were gotten through ill-gotten gains, even though they gave back the initial investments to those people. I forgot what I was just going to say. Okay, so it didn't end there with Tony, right? Because that came out, remember, you got to remember the dates. That Bell versus Dissner, where they name the list of the 9,000 something people, and they say their names, and they say how much they got, and how much, you know, they could have collected from there, and then the total amount of their judgment against them that they have to, the government is trying to get back these ill-gotten gains, right? They expected, when the people were formally informed, that they either pay the entire amount or set up a payment plan to the government, or not to the government, I keep saying the government, to the courts, because this is a private lawsuit, right? These are a private lawsuit. This isn't the US government. This isn't the IRS doing it. This is a case in the courts, in civil courts. Please forgive me for saying government, okay? This isn't a civil case. This is case law. So I was like, well, why is this Orso versus Dissner? Why isn't this Bell versus Dissner? So now I understand what the story is of this thing. Because when you see it, like just like this thing, you're like, you don't understand what it means. You don't understand. They don't even reference on that thing the amount of money. They don't even say the amount of money. I had to do the research to find the amount of money. And that Bell versus Dissner was 2017, but the case against Tony was 2021. all right, approximately, let's say 3 to 4 years, right, after that. So why is his case a different name? And it's 3 years later. It's not 4 years later. Why? It's not 2017 anymore. It's 2021. And it was because, I'm gonna explain now. And the reason that he was named then in a secondary civil case. Okay, so they had the one civil case, Bell versus Dissner. Then they had a second case called Orso versus Dissner. Let me show you. Stop. Oops. By the way, if you don't believe me, look it up yourself. It's case law. But the only years to make arrangements to pay back the money of ill-gotten gains, or either pay it all back or make arrangements, 4 years later, still had not done either of the two. They just kept the money and didn't pay it back. They didn't follow the court order to give back to the victims, right? This money isn't going into the pockets of the government. This money that was being collected, which is a profit that Tony made, the profit he made, not the original investment, the profit was going to these victims, the victims of it. But Tony was part of a group of people among these 9,400 that said to that and just kept the money. So they had to have a second civil action, which was called Orso. It's mind-blowing. Carly, wait till you hear the Game Time Sports story, I can tell you. This is not even anything, frankly. In terms of I shouldn't say that. It's, well, maybe I should say it because it's really horrible in my opinion. That's only my opinion, okay, the Game Time Sports thing. But, and by the way, to anybody who says I can't tell that story without talking about his family, they're wrong. I can tell that story without talking about his family. And someone lied and said a lie and said I was making fun of something, some tragedy. That's a lie. Never mentioned it, never knew about it, never said it, nothing. I don't do that. So that was a lie, and that pissed me off. But anyway, back to Orso versus Dissner. Orso versus Dissner. They had to file a secondary one 4 years later to go after the people who decided they weren't going to follow the rules and the court judgments to pay it back. So, like, for example, in this case we had with the RICO case, the plaintiffs have been ordered to pay the legal fees and expenses of the defendants who were Barbecue Lady and Granny's Watching, their attorney's fees and expenses, right? And there's a possibility for punitive damages. Now, so the people who filed that case are on the hook for that. They are owing that money, right? But you have an example here of Tony Mathis once before being ordered to pay money to give back to the, not just people in a court case, but the victims of this Ponzi scheme, which is a terrible thing that they do when they go after vulnerable people. And he didn't do it. So he had to be sued a second time individually. And I don't know, that was in 2021. I don't know up until this point if what has become of that. I really have no idea. I don't know if he has made arrangements with the court to start paying it back now, but this is how long this type of stuff is going on. I mean, it started before you got to the Orso versus Dissner case. You're going back to 2017, and before that, you're going back to possibly 2013, right, or 2014, something like that. And this is an example of him not following the court's order. Okay, and so this has nothing to do with any family issue because you're talking. These were actions where he was making a profit from something that he found out was an illegal activity, Ponzi scheme, of which the head of it went to prison, and to reimburse the victims of this Ponzi scheme, to return just the profits, not the initial investment. They could keep the initial investment. So if I were, let's say, I know that At Night has put out a press release saying they intend to file an appeal, an appeal of the decision. Again, I read to you what the judge said about the plaintiff's argument in this RICO case, and even went as far as accusing Lesniak of maybe not even writing some of the case because it was so of the submissions to counter the anti-SLAPP suit because it was so disorganized and like they said, is this the work of a experienced attorney? Subpar, right? I mean, they questioned it. So, I don't know what to say. If you don't care, if you're like the person who says, who told me, I don't care. Oh, Chris, that's okay. Love you. And allegedly started saying, yeah. And in my opinion, and please don't name other creators, by the way, in my chat. But my mods know that you're supposed to block people who do that. But I should have made that announcement at the beginning again. But my mods know to warn people then. Oh, Chris, you're the best. Brandy, you missed the whole thing. I'm wrapping up. I got to go and do stuff. I got to go. It's almost 4. I got to go. But, if you're like the person who wrote to me and said, I don't care what Tony has done. I don't care. That's fine. Nobody is forcing anybody to care that he has done whatever he has done. But in order for people, in my opinion, to make informed judgments about where and how they would like their, let's say, support or money through like donations to go, they should know who is thanks. They should know who is managing not just the funds, but the decisions, like the strategies, the movements. Is this being made by a person who makes good decisions, right? That's the question you should be asking yourself. Was the RICO case a good idea, right? To spend your time when there's a missing child, to be suing other YouTubers. Was that, I was pretty outspoken about this. And I said, that case brings nobody closer to finding out where Sebastian is, or what happened to him, or how we could get justice for Sebastian. That Barbecue Lady and Granny's Watching have no idea where Sebastian is. So I felt that the decision that the plaintiffs made to go forward with that was not something that was going to be beneficial to finding Sebastian, getting justice for Sebastian. And now, not only did they waste time on it, in my personal opinion, they are now also on the hook for money on it. So now they individually owe money, collectively as a group or individually or whatever, however it's decided. And is the decision to appeal it, is that a wise decision, considering we still don't know where Sebastian is? Law enforcement has taken no action on the abuse and mistreatment of Sebastian. We don't know anything more. So are the people who are guiding these things, not just in charge of funds, but the people guiding these things, the people, whatever. But it's not my place or your place to say who can and should make decisions, right? It's not our place. But it is your place to say who you can and should support, both emotionally support and financially support. That's your money. You should decide, is this somebody who should be trusted to make good decisions using the funds that I donate? That's it, okay? That's why it's important. And I don't have to go along with everything, and I don't have to be in lockstep with every person. And just because I don't agree with the person, the decision to put Tony Mathis in charge of making strategy decisions, and there's other creators who do believe that's a good decision, it doesn't mean that I don't want justice for Sebastian Rogers. One has nothing to do with the other. And I just think people have the right to know who they're dealing with. And it doesn't mean I've gone from the green side to the dark side, okay? I have never changed my stance. And I said, when I started my series, which I had to interrupt because I was ambushed, I felt, and being, to try to stop me from reading a judgment of a court case, and now having what I feel is quite a coordinated effort to discredit me and make me feel like shit as best they can. And by the way, I just want to say something. They have some people, that are very overt and coming after me, harshly and criticizing me. At the same time, I just want those people who are doing this stuff, coordinating this stuff, to know, I also know that you have people coming to me as friends at this moment, acting like they want to help me, that you guys haven't heard about. But all of a sudden, people who had nothing to say when Smiley said I should have my skull rolled and she wants to curse me the F out, the creators who had nothing to say, or subscribers who had nothing to say when that happened, nothing supportive to say about me, and in fact went on the other people's shows and stayed friends with them, said nothing to me about being, I'm sorry that they said that, or, that went too far, or anything like that, who had nothing to say, are now coming to me like they never heard about any of this shit. They don't know what the other people are doing, and they're pretending to be my friends. And by the way, if you're wondering if it's in my family, it's not. She actually has been a friend to me. But so I have to be wary of everything. I have to be wary of everything and everybody now. They're coming to me as an enemy or coming to me as a friend. I basically don't trust anybody except my people who I've known, who are my friends, who have been supportive of me from the beginning, I'm talking about my subscribers, who have been my friends from the start and have never left my side in terms of saying, I think Julie wants justice for Sebastian, for what he endured. And I would love to find out what happened to Sebastian. But I also want the truth about what happened to Sebastian. And the fact that things haven't been done that could get justice or could get answers is strange to me, is strange. And I would like to know why. But it doesn't make me any less caring about Sebastian. And I'm sorry, you can't make me not care about this case. You can't make me not care about a missing autistic child. You can't make me not care about the abuse of autistic children, an issue I have been working on and trying to do things to make the lives of autistic children safer and ease the burdens and the stress on parents of autistic children. That is how I've spent, my free time for years. It's a huge problem. The abuse of autistic children, of all disabled children, I should say, but especially autistic children who often come with a lot of behaviors. And sometimes when you have a child who's like level 1, it's not so obvious. Their disability isn't so obvious, even to their parents. So they are mistreated when they fail to meet their standards because of their parents' failure to realize that they really do have obstacles, that their disability is real. And often, and this is something I want to say, stop saying he was only diagnosed at 14, okay, or something. Because level 1 autistic kids, that means I don't know, because I always get the impression that means that he's not really autistic. When you have a level 1 autistic child, who's very, like my level 1 autistic child, who is extremely smart, but it doesn't mean he doesn't have struggles. But in their early years with level 1 autistic kids, sometimes the differences between them when they're young and their neurotypical peers are not as obvious. And there was a time when he was like 7 or 8, I even said to Al, I go, you know what? I'm not really 100% sure that he's autistic. I just don't know because he's so smart. He's so this. All the boys are running around like, like they got ants in their pants and can't sit still and are disorganized. And, I mean, just like, and talking about Pokemon and things like that. But it's only when they reach middle school and the kids socially move on to other things and other topics. And your child's still talking about Bakugan and this kind of stuff and isn't, participating socially the same way as the other kids and still is disorganized and still is this and still is that. They haven't developed the same way. Doesn't become as obvious. So that is typical. So we know your intentions are pure. Thank you. Thank you, Robbie. And by the way, your name is the same name, but you don't have an E at the end as my son. So I always like to say your name, Robbie. And yeah, well, there's lots to be investigated. There's lots to be looked at. And I want the truth. I want the truth, even if it means learning hard things to learn. And I'm sorry if me saying this stuff hurts people who care about Tony and love Tony, because maybe they think I'm lying, or maybe they feel like they weren't given all the information, or maybe maybe it doesn't hurt them. Maybe they don't care. Like the person wrote to me, they don't care. I don't care. But this is not stuff in the distant past, okay? Appreciate you putting out there what you found. Yeah, that's it, okay? And it's not to hurt him. It's to help everybody who has been following and caring about Sebastian for more than a year now and wants justice for Sebastian. Who's going to get us there? Not us, but who's going to get Sebastian there? That's what us, when I say we want to see justice for Sebastian. We want to see him found. We want to see justice. We want to see the people who harmed him get justice, period.